Hey guys, Poro here with another Worlds 2025 daily recap, this time for day 3 of Swiss stage. We got our first best of 3s today, as we'll see Top Esports versus KT, and CFO versus AL to see who our first two teams in quarterfinals will be. Today we'll see the return of Fearless Draft, so we'll get a better read of what the meta might look like in the knockout stage. Also, due to the hundreds of comments on the last video, we will be implementing half stars from now on. Top Esports versus KT is first, let's get right into the games. Game 1 was actually a KT win. Not to jinx anything just yet, but Top Esports started their choke job a bit. They actually had a large lead in this game, I would say. Grubs and Feats went to Top Esports through their clean early game, and they had sole point at 18 minutes. The only way KT could win the game was through out-team fighting, and that's exactly what happened. They had standoffs at Otacon, Baron, and all the dragons after Dragon 4, and every fight was the same formula. Perfect had great equalizers, Cuz was using his leads well, and on the other side, Hong and Cream could not hit a single engage to save their life. Both of them messed up multiple flash engages, and those are the two primary engagers on the team, so if they aren't connecting then the fight isn't winnable. Kanavi also got one shot in a lot of fights and timers where he could have been useful. Overall, it was just a disaster clash from the initiators on Top Esports, and KT were able to collect in the fights. I thought Jackie Love and 369 actually played respectable games and were team gapped, and everyone on KT were pretty much locked in despite a couple of silly looking plays here and there. I think everyone on KT contributed positively to that win. Well, it was a 2-0 as predicted, just in the opposite way. I think we're potentially seeing the start of Top Esports' 6th international choke in a row. Last game they had some fire and were ahead early and should have won the game. This time they all got ran over in the classic uninspiring Top Esports fashion. This is the classic from Top Esports. There's a reason why I said in my team breakdown what I said. Hong was useless on the Recon, could never engage because of Trundle Pillar. Kanavi should have had some angles to do stuff on the Zed since it's a pretty solid Zed game, but he was invisible as well and had a few really bad fights. Honestly, that's really what it was. KT were just the better teamfighting team on the day. 369 played fine. We've all come to expect the world where 369 is being turbo sprinted down by his entire team. I ended up still giving everyone on Top Esports a 4. I thought throughout all the ints and whatnot, they were still moving around the map somewhat decently and making smart plays to try and get back into the game. They just collapsed whenever it was time to actually make a stand. For KT, I thought the biggest performer was BDD. He had a few really nice ults and carried a lot of teamfights. Cuz and Peter also had their moments, with Cuz using good pillars all game and Peter having a standout Drake fight to get KT the lead initially. Overall, Top Esports should be extremely disappointed with themselves. Again, the expectation should have been that Top Esports 2-0s this series, but the reality is that they always choke whenever there's any real pressure on them, and that's what we saw today. KT did what KT has done all tournament, having subpar early games and strong teamfights later, and it was Top Esports who shut down and underperformed. I think Top Esports will still slip into the top 8 at some point, but we're speeding towards that 0-3 quarterfinals exit that we've come to know and love from this org. For KT, MVP could either go to Cuz or BDD. I'm giving it to Cuz just because I thought he was very close to a 7 for that game too and was super useful at translating his leads into advantages in both games. BDD had the flashier plays, but I think BDD could have played worse and KT still would have won, whereas Cuz's gameplay was pretty instrumental towards getting them across the finish line. Everyone else did about as good as I thought they would, no other real standouts today. Game 1 of CFO versus AL was another banger. CFO keeps on delivering those at this tournament so far. Rest played instead of Driver this time, and AL came out with a very interesting draft. The idea is that Maokai is a Wukong counter, and they picked it because they saw CFO ban Trundle on 4-5, which means they are locking in Sion for sure, and Sion loses out against Kled in lane and on side, so you get access to the Kled Maokai combo with 2 theoretical counters. The problem is that those champions lack some damage early, and we saw AL go for a fight on 3rd drag where they didn't have the ability to get through CFO's health bars at all. Tarzan went in on Hongq, but didn't Bramble smash the Aurora back, which made the Nico ult miss, and from there the fight was cooked. CFO then played a pretty solid Otacon situation, although Hongq absolutely should have died as Shanks and Hope misplayed the fight pretty hard. CFO now had a commanding lead, but decided to go for a risky Baron start with no way to keep Maokai out and no real advantage in the fight. AL would pull the trigger here, stealing the Baron and going for a teamfight scrap, which got them a bunch of shutdowns and brought the game back to a tense state. I docked everyone's ratings on CFO a bit for this because that's a team-wide game-losing decision, so if the ratings look a bit low for CFO, then that's why. The game ended shortly after though, as AL went for a hard engage on mid lane and CFO absorbed the engage well, followed by a really great turn from Hongq, which allowed the team to wipe AL and walk it in for the win. CFO definitely looked pretty solid this game, but I'm not sold that they'll win the series. I think AL went for a very unorthodox comp that had good ideas but was difficult to execute, and CFO also showed that their mid-late game macro isn't fantastic. A great start, but they'll still need to work hard in Game 2. Game 2 may look like an AL stomp based on the objectives, but trust me, it was not. At any given moment, CFO had the ability to win a fight because they have such good backline dive. In the game, you could tell AL was definitely feeling the pressure and every fight was relatively close. CFO actually had a good lead heading into the first Drake, but AL simply outfought them and got some kills back. Really, this was the story of the whole game. The fights were close, but in the end, CFO overfought on some timers they shouldn't have. CFO felt the pressure to contest third Drake because if they lost it, then they would give over feats, but AL kited out the fight well and ended up with a 4-for-1. Then CFO got a 2-for-1 after AL graded for Scuttle Crab, but then they went for an Otacon start and ended up turning it into another fist fight as AL got the better of them again. Then, at the fourth Drake fight and Otacon situation, AL, specifically Tarzan and Flandre, played out the situation great and AL were able to pick up both. The game truly broke open though when CFO thought they had a situation to go in with numbers, but maybe they didn't realize Flandre had TP up as they got wiped funneling through Tribush. This was the last fight CFO could afford to lose and AL had control for the rest of the game. Throughout the entire game, whether it was lane phase, side lane, or team fights, Shanks was getting the better of Hongq. Hongq tried to go too aggressive in a few fights especially and was definitely struggling a bit. Flandre and Hope both played great games, but Hope did get picked out on a bad timer bot once before an objective which could have been bad. For CFO, Doggo played out the game pretty well across the board, but everyone else had a combination of good and bad plays which described those ratings. Honestly, AL even in this game looked pretty uncomfortable. I think anyone could win Game 3. Game 3 was pretty fun to watch. It felt like AL had a bit of an early game damage problem and that they were struggling to find any plays to make. I would say for the first 16 minutes of the game or so, anywhere CFO were putting their pressure, AL had no ability to fight back in that spot. However, AL were playing the weak side better and were able to keep the game relatively even, waiting for their chance to strike. This opportunity would come after CFO took the Herald, as they got a bit complacent and weren't ready for a massive collapse that led to a 2-for-0 as AL stole feats out of nowhere basically. CFO would make a return play on the Herald crash with a creative engage mid that threw the game back in CFO's favor though, and now it seemed like the game was just about over. Feeling confident with their lead, CFO started the Otacon, but they were outplayed hard on the fight. Tarzan stepped forward to chunk the Renekton, and the call was for Junja to ult the Trundle as Misfortunal and Renekton engage one-shot him. This was a masterful bait though, as Tarzan instantly flashed out before Vi got in range and ulted the Renekton, which allowed Renekton to get one shot and the Misfortune ult to be wasted. With this massive outplay, AL aced CFO on the objective and completely swapped the momentum. CFO were still within striking distance, but with Rest getting chunked out by LeBlanc right as the soul spawned, AL were able to claim that for free, and one more clean fight in front of the Baron was all AL needed to end the game mid. Flandre, Tarzan, and Shanks were all excellent this game, Hope was solid, and Kyle made a few mistakes early but was fine later. For CFO, I think their gameplay was pretty high level across the board, although Kaiwing and Rest both made some untimely mistakes after the Otacon loss came in that made it super hard for CFO to play again. I think these two teams in this best of 3 played some very strong League of Legends. It felt like CFO showed up and played a good game in all 3, and were simply outclassed on objectives across the series due to AL stepping up and playing better. For me, Flandre was absolutely the MVP of the series. The way he played the weak side and the way he team fought made a world of difference on multiple occasions, and he made next to no mistakes. Moving forward, I think AL are looking scary. I don't trust Shanks and Kyle quite yet, but they're both definitely performing closer to their strong split 2 form than their mediocre split 3 form so far. Everyone else is playing as expected, which means the team is coming out a lot better than I predicted they would. Originally, I had them as a quarterfinals exit, now I'm not so sure. Especially since AL tends to get better the deeper into a series they get, watch out for this team to potentially be a big semifinals threat. As for CFO, they've continued to show solid play. I would be shocked if they don't end up making quarterfinals. It feels like they're playing more than good enough to take down any of the Western teams so far in the coming rounds. I am a bit worried for them moving forward though, as their wins have all come from very similar styles of team comp. If they make it to quarterfinals, I don't know how they'll do in a best of 5 considering they'll have to eventually play with restricted amounts of tank tops and engaged supports. CFO still need to prove to me that they can win with more styles. Tomorrow, we have 4 best of 1s in the 1-1 pool to decide who gets a shot at promotion and who gets bumped down to their last life. There's a lot of scary teams here, but many potentially fun upsets too. First, we have Secret Whales versus Fly. I have Fly winning because usually Fly is very good against teams who have sloppy mid and late games like Secret Whales, but I could totally see a world where Secret Whales comes out and dominates early game hard enough to give Fly zero room to breathe. Next up is Gen G versus T1, and I predicted Gen G because of the two teams, Gen G has definitely looked cleaner so far to me. However, T1 has been a better Game 1 team than Gen G all year basically, so don't be too shocked if this one goes T1's favor as well. Imagine if we get Gen G in the 1-2 pool, that would be insane. Next up is G2 BLG, and again it's one I could see going either way. I have BLG winning, but BLG have not looked clean at all so far, and I can see G2 doing it. Finally, we have HLE versus 100 Thieves. I expect HLE to stomp. That's all I have for you for this one. I recently started a Patreon for people who want to support me more while I'm making these videos. I have 3 tiers, each with varying amounts of benefits including different types of behind the scenes content, and even a custom Poro drawing that I'll display in video outros. If that interests you, check out the Patreon link in the description. I'll see you all for the next one. Bye!